Welcome to Disengaged, the podcast. I'm Leah Harding, your host. Hello, Pod Fam. Welcome back. I need to figure out what our little family here is called, but Pod Fam will do for now. If you have any ideas, let me know. But I'm so glad you're here for the second episode ever. And I, after recording the first one, was trying to figure out the best way to really jump into this and to give you an insight into more of who I am, how I got here, but also the content that we're all here for, which is ending engagements or relationships and trying to figure out the nuance around that and how do we find our own happiness. So I was like, well, honestly, where do I go when I have a problem? I go to my friends, right? And I'm like, okay, which friend has been there through this whole process? It was my friend Hales. And I was like, she would be perfect for the pod. And so I called her up and I was like, hey, do you want to do this? And she was like, yes, let's do it. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you Hales, i.e. BFF, and I'll call her BFF throughout this, but that's just, I don't know, it's just a little fun little quirk thing. I am so excited that you are the first pod guest on Disengaged, and BFF, it's an honor to have you here, and I'm so excited to pick your brain, and I literally am so curious about what you're going to say.
I am so happy to be first guest. It's so amazing to be here, and I'm so excited to talk with you today.
BFF knows the whole backstory, but I kind of want to hear it from her perspective because, like, as we're going through this whole disengaged thing, when you're engaged or you're about to be and you're worried or nervous or you have the horrible phrase of cold feet, but what I like to call frozen legs, like if that's you, like you have a BFF who is going through this with you. And I think to get that step back perspective is really helpful in understanding more about yourself. I know that has been helpful for me in my journey since ending an engagement, which, by the way, BFF, it's been 5 years.
I can't believe it. I don't know how we blinked and we're now 5 years later, but yeah, it has been that amount of time, and just huge props. The last 5 years have been extraordinary to watch. You have navigated your own processing and healing, and the way that you're giving back now, it's just really inspiring.
Oh, thank you. That's so encouraging. So this BFF is also your BFF, okay? So this is the whole point here, is to get a bird's eye view, which perspective is everything when you're going through something like this. So if you can give me like a rundown in your mind of how you saw my fiancé at the time and I, you knew us before, I believe, we got engaged.
That's
Isn't
right.
that correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so like, what was your take there? Were there any things that you noticed that were maybe like off, or I'll give the floor to you.
Yeah, just as we were thinking about having this conversation and chatting about it and just kind of reflecting back, it was really interesting to kind of recall my own memories and think about how, yeah, when we first met, you were, very serious at the time with your, ex-fiance. It was about, I want to say a year and a half before you called off the engagement. So it was summer 2018. And I met you both at kind of a group event in the evening. And I remember
that so well.
Yeah,
you were
I remember that
you fly business
so well.
class, and I was like, yeah, you're like bougie.
That's right. Yep. And it was just the most interesting, funny group of people. And I remember, just will be totally honest, my first impression was, wow, they are the it couple. Both very high-powered careers, both had been together for a long time with each other. And there was just kind of this, interesting, almost like pressurized element to it. And we can talk about this, later as well. But I think that one of the things I've thought about, and, your relationship is that there was just so much investment in the relationship. And how that is an interesting factor. So yeah, I remember the first impressions were quite strong that you two were the kind of it couple also in your community, which is very interesting. And then I did not see you again for quite a while. I started seeing you again more frequently from our own life and travels and things in about a year later. And then I was coming back pretty frequently to your side of the global neighborhood. When I was seeing
BFF was a frequent in Qatar. When I was living over in Qatar, BFF was going back and forth, and so that's where we met. And it's a small community too. We have like, it's a capital city, but the community that we were in, that I was in, a very like religious community, was very small. So I think that is an important thing to like to touch on. But so we met, and then we stayed in touch, but then you came back.
Yes. So also, first impression of BFF, immediately had a friend crush on her, immediately wanted to be her friend.
Likewise.
And so it was, love at first sight, as, they say. And so I knew when I started returning in 2019, I was very excited to get to know BFF better, because I was seeing my boyfriend at the time, who was living there. And so when I would come and visit, we would always get together. And so I would hear from you and your experiences, and would always hear about kind of your dating. And I remember, hearing about your engagement from you. And there's a very strong memory that I have of, we were in this very strange kind of cafe, elevated. It felt kind of like we were in an Alice in Wonderland tea shop, if that makes sense. There was like kind of like a cakes and tea, and it felt like a garden kind of house. It was the strangest place.
Like
I think
on the
so.
Pearl?
It might have been. It's giving Pearl energy for sure, if I'm remembering that right. But
the Pearl is an island, is a man-made island for those listening. Like, it's crazy. It's a different world, but so the Gulf Arabs love to like create new land, and so
that's right.
It's crazy. It was really cool, very like swanky or whatnot, and then BFF and I rock up. So it must have been something like that. I literally have no idea what you're about to say.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I have a very strong memory of that hangout with you, because I remember, getting to hear from you about your engagement, and it was fall of 2019. I think it was October. I actually looked up some of our like message exchanges to try to kind of get the dates right. So it was October when we first met up, and I remember you, sharing about the plans and how, the wedding plans were challenging, and just a lot of the kind of things that you would imagine you would hear from someone who's planning a very large global wedding, because you both had very international communities. But I did hear this very persistent kind of subliminal anxiety as you would speak, and there were these pauses of kind of like waiting for an affirmation. And I remember thinking, like, I was getting to know you quite well. I did not know your, fiance at the time well, but obviously had interacted with him in those spaces. And I remember thinking, oh, this is like strange, because they're the couple, and why are there these anxieties, and they've been together for years. So I remember just, being supportive and encouraging, and being excited for you, but also just being really humble, like thinking, oh, like maybe she's just, nervous. This is a big life step. But I remember like feeling a bit nagging that you seemed to be like in a restless position about it. So you specifically mentioned how you weren't sure if things were like going to get done in time, and there was a lot of kinds of like things around not sure how things were going to work. And I remember just thinking, like, those are real, and I am also a very logistical person, and at the same time it felt like you were doing this by yourself, which also should not be the case if you're like in an engaged couple. So that was the other kind of striking nuance. So I remember that time with you, and then obviously met up with you, when I would come back basically on a monthly basis. So I also remember seeing you in December, because I came out for, the New Year's to never be forgotten. The New Year's going into 2020, when everyone said we would have 2020 vision.
We started a dumpster fire.
That's right. We really did.
Literally.
And we had the 2020 vision glasses. It was so bad. Oh, man.
That was very, I don't know what the word is, when you're looking ahead and it's the wrong, like everything you're saying is like, I don't know what the word is. But yes, the 2020 vision glasses were epic. Okay. So you were there for New Year.
Yep. And I remember seeing you there, and it was just a lot more, everything that I shared and experienced with you in the fall was just intensified. And I remember you sharing your doubts more directly at that time with me, of kind of, maybe, I'm trying to remember exactly. I don't know if it was implicit or explicit about postponing, perhaps. But I do remember there just being I don't know if I can do this. And just kind of communicated in more like subtle ways. So I remember just being really, kind of as your friend and someone who was still also getting to know you. Because another thing for the pod BFFs to know is we're jumping ahead a little bit in the story, but our friendship, I love when female friendships arise out of male connections. It's just so fun when we find out, oh, we're the soul sisters.
Yes, right.
But we got very close following the end of the engagement. So not to jump too far ahead of the story, but I remember wondering at that time, at the beginning of 2020, like what my role was as your friend, because I wasn't as close to you, obviously, as I am now, or I was by mid-2020. So it was an interesting thing when you think about with your friendship, like what is the role of a friend in a situation like this? So I remember struggling with, should I say something or express concern? What is support in this situation? And that was a question mark at the time.
Well, I don't remember like exact conversations we had during that time, because I think that whole era is like a blur, like a traumatic blur in a way for me. I think I've just like shoved it all down, but I remember very clearly this feeling of like acceptance and calm around you. And like when we would talk or hang out, it was like I felt very safe, I felt seen, and I didn't have to like perform. I like didn't have to be like a bride to be and it was like, no, here's me. And I think that's something about you that speaks volumes, is that you were like, you allowed me to have like a safety net, and you would like write me very deliberately and like often. And that meant a lot to me. You still do that. You're way better at communicating than I am. as a
it was my nature.
I'm really bad. Yes. Yeah, you're so much better at that. Really everyone's better at that than I am. But yeah, you were like so encouraging there, because it's like, because we had 2 weddings planned, because there was, so your memory is so right, because there was a wedding in England, and like we had everything planned out for that, and I was like, I just don't think I can do it, like, and I thought the problem was that my extended family couldn't come. And so we're like, okay, let's move it to North Carolina, like closer to my extended family. And like everything on paper was like fixed from the England version, and I was like, even having all of the family there, that gut thing is still around. So you were bang on with like remembering that there was that switching of dates, and that kind of like, I don't know if I can do this next one.
Yep, that's right. Because I remember feeling as your friend unclear of, to what degree is the anxiety, and so is it at large, or is it based on exactly the fact that there was this very complex plan to try to involve everyone with multiple weddings. So I remember returning back home in shortly after New Year's, and then I had my own grand plan to return back mid-February. That's when my birthday is, as well as of course Valentine's Day, and wanted to return back to see my boyfriend at the time. And obviously there was just again so many life-altering moments when I think about obviously the end of your engagement and getting to be with you, and also the fact that I had a grand plan to leave after a month, after, your classic 30-day tourist visa.
I remember
and then got
that.
to walk, got to walk through with you through the next many months before leaving Doha. So kind of switching gears a little bit. I remember getting because you told me via message initially that you had ended the
About
engagement. Yes, that's my memory. And then obviously saw you very soon after that. But
it was within a month.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. And I remember hearing we were going to have this kind of get together with friends, and was really, really looking forward to seeing you and to being there. And I remember thinking, oh, this is so, kind of providential that I'll have like a couple weeks where we'll overlap in the midst of everything that's going on, and knowing that, again, correct me if I'm misremembering this, but the kind of date was April. That was the original wedding date. So I was like, okay, this will be great. And I remember also you had family kind of coming in to support as well. So I was excited to just kind of be a part of the We Support BFF community. for a couple weeks, but then ended up getting to extend it for months, since I didn't end up leaving the country with this little thing called COVID-19. Basically moved in. So it was, just one of the most surreal and, shocking gifts to be able to, frankly solidify one of my best friendships in the midst of a lot of grief and pain that we were all experiencing in the world, but particularly thinking about making brave choices to choose ourselves. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, you were saying that like you didn't know how to read my anxiety, and I think that's really interesting because I really feel for BFFs in this scenario, because that puts you in a hard spot. Because like, are you trying to talk the bride to be or groom to be off a ledge, like, no, it's going to be okay, or are you like, actually you need to cut this out? Like, how did you navigate that? Because that's very sticky. That is diplomacy 101.
Definitely 101, maybe even 201. I don't know. But I remember
it's advanced diplomacy for sure.
It's advanced diplomacy. And I remember, with you, it was an interesting kind of course of events with, as we were getting closer in our friendship, you were getting closer to your own decision. And so then I think it was really a gift to increase our closeness as you ended your engagement, and I could support you in kind of the grieving and like healing process. And I think I remember asking a lot of thoughtful questions to you, and that was kind of or I hoped that they were thoughtful in terms of, where do you think that's coming from? Or, do you think that you will, feel better once this logistical thing is resolved? I remember just trying to ask questions. I didn't feel necessarily comfortable giving you that level of advice, especially because I didn't know your fiance at the time very well. And I think what was interesting is I take a lot of pride, probably a very strange amount of pride, in having multiple friends at this point who over the last 5 years have broken off their engagements. So both men and women.
This is definitely on my list of questions for you. Okay, keep going. I'm very excited by this statistic that you somehow have.
I know. I have multiple people call me out on this now. Yes. So, and also BFFs, you should absolutely look up the most incredible article, blog piece that BFF wrote about why they ended their engagement. And I have sent that to all of my friends that broke off their engagements. And so we are spreading the love. But yeah, I will say that I think that a lot of it, in terms of how to navigate as a friend, I think it depends a lot on the level of closeness you have with the friend, the level of trust. And I've been trying to also just be someone who asks questions. Like, would you like advice? Would you like support? What are you looking for? And so I've had friends who have said, do you think I should be with this person? I've had friends say, tell me that it's going to be okay and I can get through this. So a lot of the times I'll try to just support in the way that that person can articulate it to me. But I think if the person doesn't really know, or they're so deeply restless, like we talked about before, I think that's an area where I felt a bit braver to push a little bit more. Because again, I, for better and for challenging, I'm a fierce friend, where I want my friends to be happy, and I want my friends to have what they deserve, and I want my friends to, because everyone deserves to be happy and to be loved and to be fulfilled. And I think that a lot of times we let a lot of noise get in the way. Our family's expectations. I think a big reoccurring theme that particularly I've heard with my female friends that have broken off engagements is that, well, we've just been together for so long, or I've invested so much, or this is just...
that was part of my reasoning, too.
Yes, that's right. You're just kind of... There's a stuckness to it that is something that I think is a dangerous thing, because we always have choice. And what better time, frankly, than an engagement versus once you were in the legally binding contract of marriage. So, yeah.
What questions that you've asked your friends do you feel like have resonated most, or is it really case by case, would you say?
it's definitely contextual. It is case by case. And at the same time, it never hurts to go back to basics. Why do you love this person? Why do you want to be with them? What's giving you pause? What is concerning you? And then this is not an original Haley thought. This was borrowed and cited from another BFF. But there's if this person is never to change and never to grow from the current moment that they are right now, are you willing to live with that? And so that was one question I asked a friend, which was a very close friend. But I think that, again, it is dependent on how close you are with the person. But I think trying to inquire a little bit as to what's driving the anxieties, or what is, again, falsely considered cold feet, I think is important.
And then have the reasons for your friends ending the engagement been similar, would you say?
There is, frankly, kind of a lack of willingness to live with a certain aspect of the relationship, or something doesn't quite fit. Sometimes it's something very overt. There's a mental health issue that is not being addressed. So this is a more classic example of if someone is refusing to get help for something, whether it be, again, a mental health challenge, an addiction, or something like that. That was the case for one individual. I think that more commonly, though, there is this, I think there's a very interesting wear and tear that can happen in terms of your own trust with yourself as you continue to be faced with the realities of your relationship if you're not fully 100% like in it and confident. So I think some of it, and feel free to correct me, because again, this is just witnessing and observing and supporting as your friend. So if I'm thinking about your situation wrong as well, I think there was a kind of a lingering fear that grew, or an anxiety that grew, and also just maybe repetitions of either issues or the concerns never dissipated. Either they steadied or they grew.
I think the self-trust thing is big, especially if it's a slow chipping away. Like, yes. You're like, well, this was a bit of an issue, and then you let it slide, and then another one comes up. You're like, well, it's not as bad as the other one, and I'm dealing with the other one, and it's this slow, overarching thing. There's this really great little children's story that I would read in Jordan growing up, and you'll laugh at this, but it was like a parable about a Bedouin man who lived in a tent. They're like a nomadic people, and he had this camel outside of the tent, and the camel was like, I'm cold, can I come in? And the Bedouin was like, no, there's no room for you in here. And the camel was like, well, just my toe, like my toes. And he's like, no, it's like just one foot. And he's like, okay, fine. Well, kept asking. The Bedouin kept conceding a little bit. By the end of it, the guy is outside of the tent and the camel's inside and warm. And he completely lost himself to try to make all these accommodations for someone else.
Yes.
And it's a fine line, right? Like, you want to like help the person you need to be. Like, relationships are hard. I don't think, though, they have to be that hard. Like, yep. I think that's like a fallacy too, right? Like, well, relationships are just hard. It's like, well, maybe like your grandparents have just been telling you that, and maybe their relationship wasn't super healthy, or, a lot of people I think are married who shouldn't be married, or have stayed married for too long.
Yes.
Or should have never gotten married in the first place, and a divorce was a good thing for them in the long run because of these concessions and loss of self, and like the inability to self-advocate, which is what we've talked about before.
That's right. And I think you've hit on a couple of key points as well. One of which, when you think about the self-trust, I think there can be an isolating element in relationships where it can be harder and harder to communicate if you're having doubts or struggles in the relationship because of the time and length of investment and wanting to, there's almost a save face mentality. So I think about how public engagement is and how, there's photos often, there's the ring, there's, the plans around the wedding and things like that. And so I do think there's, you've made this public pronouncement. And so it's, again, a very public version of I am trusting to, commit my life with this person. And so I think that there's a very probably psychological and emotional element to that, to where, again, to reevaluate that would be, a big thing. And I think that there are also, I suspect, like social elements around that, where kind of across the board, I know from what you've shared in your experience as well, many mutual friends, mutual community, a lot of relationships intertwined even within the engagement in a lot of ways.
Major
so I
overlap.
think there's a lot of overlap. And so I saw that across the board in terms of very interdependent, interconnected friendships and relationships that were very much involved with the relationship as well. So I think there's a few, of those more nuanced pieces that I don't think can be undervalued because they play such a prominent role in just day-to-day relationships as well. It just becomes your normal. So the idea of, disestablishing that and ending an engagement could be the end of community. It could be the end of a layer of identity even. Not that it should be that. I think that, again, we can have a whole separate conversation of the societal standards, but I do think that there's a very false idea of being locked in when you're engaged, which is, I think, incorrect. It is not marriage, is not the legally binding contract. So I think that that is also kind of a false narrative.
Right. I totally agree. It's like when you graduate high school and you announce that you're going to a college and like you commit to the college, but you haven't like paid the tuition yet, or like maybe you have, but you haven't actually taken any classes. It's like you're still not actually at that school. Like,
yep.
There's that window that we allow ourselves to have in so many other areas of life, but then with engagements, especially in American and Western societies, like it's like, oh, you're basically married. Like,
yep.
And like, who do you go and talk to, especially if you've been like with this person for a long time? Who do you go and talk to if you're having problems? Like, you talk to probably that person, and then the cycle just continues because you're like, well, they're really good now at talking you off the ledge, and you're good at believing them and trusting them, and you want it to work. That's what sucks about ending engagements is like I wanted it to work so badly.
Yep.
But I was
There's
like,
a reason why you got
can't.
engaged. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I shouldn't have gotten engaged knowing what I know. Like, I think that was unwise and immature. But I also thought that was what the next step should be. And like,
That's
if
right.
I hadn't done it before, which I hadn't, it's like, well, maybe this is just what it feels like. Like, people say, like, we talked about it now, this is like the third time, like cold feet, but like people talk about it like you should just expect to have it. And I've never been married, so like maybe there's a healthy amount of cold feet, but like to go into something like that and have such reservations about how it works, but you don't even know how it is supposed to be, and people around you are like, yeah, I felt this way too. It's like hindsight, it's like, yeah, of course they feel that way. Like, they did the thing that maybe they shouldn't have even been doing. So that's why all these people like resonated with this feeling that I had, but they were the same people saying you should go ahead and get married. But they're like, yeah, I felt the same way. It's like, looking back on that, that has really boggled my mind.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because there's such a false assumption that what's right for one person will automatically be right for someone else. So in addition to it, again, potentially being bad advice generally, it's also just because it's worked for one person, every individual is unique and every relationship is unique. So there's going to be all of those different facets. And the other thing I like an analogy that I can see how this lands for you and our BFFs, but I also think about engagement for us travel girlies, like buying a flight. You have 24 hours to change your mind, cancel it, no cost, whatever. Obviously, that's not a perfect analogy, but thinking about, okay, I bought the flight, I'm going to go. But I have this window that is perfectly curated for me to consider and to say, actually, no, I'm not going to go on this flight. I'm not going to do that. And even after the 24-hour for, free cancellation, you can still cancel your flight. So I think about that as well. And a lot of people are like, well, I bought the flight, I have to do it. It's like, no, you can cancel the flight. Or again,
I mean, you can even go to the airport and not get on the plane.
Oh yes, I've also lived those experiences as well. So yeah, I can testify to that one as well. Going to an airport and somehow not boarding the flight, but that's a different podcast. Or planning to take a flight and then you are somewhere 6 months longer. So yeah, there's True. So many aspects to that. But that's a working analogy that is still, I think, a bit in process.
And there's just so many emotions at play, too. Because, I remember very clearly not wanting to hurt my then fiancé. I loved him. Why would I want to, hurt him? And that's, this big rub, too, of people that write me. They're like, but the classic line, and I said this, too, was, he hasn't done anything wrong. And it's but you don't have to do something wrong to not be, a good fit. For your flight analogy, it's well, maybe it's not the right thing for you to fly to Marrakesh. You needed to go, your business meeting got moved, plans changed, things worked out. You need to go to Tenerife. And it's there's nothing against Marrakesh. Marrakesh did nothing wrong, but I probably am taking this analogy too far, but it's just, it's there's nothing actually wrong with the person. It's just no, that wasn't the right fit.
That's right.
And I know religion is a big wound in my life and something that you and I talk about a lot.
We share.
But
yep.
Yeah. But a quote that a pastor in yonder year told me was, the right guy at the wrong time is the wrong guy. And I for some reason that resonates. I think there's more to it, but there's nothing wrong with the guy, but the timing is just wrong. And if you hold out on the timing, I think you come to realize that it's not the right person. If I could make a law about relationships in this country, the only law I would make is that you can't get married until you're 30.
Yes! I think that should be law.
That should be the only love law out there, marriage law.
I think it should be absolutely, you should not get married until at minimum, your brain is fully formed, which again, you'll hear that's 25, you'll hear that's 27 or closer to 30. And also there's, discussions about, biologically men, women, all of those things. But, absolutely. I think that it is so, again, I've never been engaged, but it is so interesting to me how lightly people will go into engagement and marriage. And then also my hot take is also why would people not have more, consideration, and why would it not be more normalized to end an engagement? Because I do think that, love is involved and feelings are involved. And so you're going to want to pursue those. And often, again, the person you'll be really discussing this the most with will be the person that you're engaged to, or that you're dating, or that you want to be with. And so I think it would be, of course, understandable that people would get engaged, but I do find it interesting that calling off an engagement is still more taboo than I think it should be. It shouldn't be at all, but the fact that there's still and this is something a few of my friends who've called off engagements have discussed, is there's a strange shame or embarrassment around it that I think is so sad and wrong. And the fact that I think there should be a celebration around it. You've made a really big choice, and that you should be honoring yourself in that. And the fact that there is this embarrassment and shame, I think, is so sad to see. So I've also been a very fierce advocate for my friends that have made that very brave choice. And I think that is something that we need to do better about as friends to each other and to a community. I think a lot of times people also feel like, oh, I don't know what to say or how to support, so I won't say anything. And I think that's, again, understandable, but that's not the right approach. It is, you're isolating
Anyone
the person.
Listening, do not say nothing to the ender of the engagement.
That's right.
Rule number 1, friends.
Yes, and we're humans. We can, for the person at the end of the engagement, I will also make a hot take that they need just as much support as the person who was the quote ND, because
there's two people here.
There's two people involved. There's two people in pain, and both pain is valid. And I would also argue to say, and I know this from being your friend, BFF, and also my other friends, there was a very long, exhausting process of doubts and fears and questions to get to that very challenging decision. So they are also walking through a much longer timeline of pain, I would argue, and their own grief and hurt, perhaps than even the other person, because you've been walking with this for much longer. And so it's been a very isolating experience. And so to have support once you've finally made the brave choice is, I would say, essential. So, yes.
Yes, I think you nailed that one on the head. Both people are definitely hurting. I do think ending it for me came with a relief, where it came for my partner like a shock. And then he had to like process the shock, whereas I was like processing the relief and the heartbreak. But like to hold both of those emotions of like, I have done such a brave thing and I am utterly heartbroken and I hate that I did that. But then I think holding both of those tensions is so exhausting. And I'm not trying to like compare, I know you're not either, like trauma of the broken up or the breaker upper, but I agree with you that there is like this tension that you're holding for quite some time before the pain for the other even starts.
Yep. And all pain is valid and real. And I think it's, people will always come. I shouldn't say always, but it is typical that those that are broken up with, the support will come because it is such a clear, yes, this person has been broken up with, they need support. And especially when I think about women supporting women in particular, not that men shouldn't have it as well, of course, everyone should, but there is such a imperative to support our fellow women who have made this brave choice. So I think that is something that, we can kind of overlook if we're not careful. This person chose to do this breakup, they're fine. Like they must be fine with that choice. That doesn't,
look at the pain they've caused.
Correct. Yes. Or even a villainizing. That's right. So I think that there's also, again, like different examples of how friendships have fallen out because of the person who chose to break up with someone, which again, I think is such a, I wish that didn't happen. And that happens more than obviously it ever should.
Like phrases like emotionally abusive, like about calling it off. Like I've heard phrases like that, or like emotionally manipulative to let the engagement go on so long, or to have even said yes to begin with. And it's like, no one's choosing this type of manipulation. Like I wasn't. And I was like manipulating self in a way. Like I couldn't even see the forest through the trees. Like I was so confused by it all because of like the pressures. And like, it's almost like you don't take it lightly, but then it's also like the next thing that you do. And so it's like, well, this is just the step you take. And so to then say it's actually a step I'm taking back, like that, as if that is a bad thing, or that is somehow manipulating your partner. I think those types of words are not helpful in that situation, like at all.
Yeah. They can be quite damaging, and they're frankly not accurate. And so again, I do think there is such a false narrative as well in terms of the timeline and the progression and societal standards for relationships. And I think there's a lot of factors of the pressure to get married, and especially when we think about kind of the Western societies, but very much a global issue as well. So yeah, I think that's exactly right.
There's a lot more of this conversation that BFF and I had. She goes into talking about the commonalities between her other friends that have also ended an engagement and what it's been like for her as a friend to watch so many of her friends go through this. So it's a really, really interesting part of our chat. We're going to save it though for part 2. It'll be coming up soon. Be sure to subscribe and follow along so that you can get notifications when that episode drops. Alrighty, Pod Gang, you guys are awesome. You're amazing, and I will see you soon. This podcast has been an Anthology Group production.